Hello everyone, it's your host Cyberboard, and today I'm going to start a series of documenting my home lab project. For the first chapter I'm going to set up domain controller with a couple of virtual machines to simulate an organization, secure it and configure it. First of all, I would like to explain the components that we are going to be using for this first chapter. First of all, I'm going to be using an Active Directory on server 2022 Windows, and it's going to be containing three simple services as a start, which is domain/Active Directory, remote access service, NAT, which is network address translation, and DHCP, which stands for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. A quick explanation about Active Directory. Active Directory is usually used by companies to organize their users and enforce policies upon them. Now, what do I mean by that? For example, if a company does not want their user to be having access, for example, to the internet, or using certain applications, or be limited to certain role or permissions, the Active Directory or domain controller would help them enforce these rules upon all their users. Active Directory also uses domain, which is top-level domain, usually registered to the company's website, for example. And Active Directory is comprised of three components, which are like the main components, which is domains, as we mentioned before, trees and forest. Now, as a simple explanation for what tree and forest is, a tree is a collection of domains, whereas a forest is a collection of trees. Some of the key features that I mentioned before that we're going to be using for this first chapter: Active Directory domain, which is a collection of objects, and an object can be a single user or a group of users. It can be also hardware components such as computers or printers. The second feature we will be covering and using to be able to connect our endpoint users to the internet is remote access service and network address translation. Now, the remote access service is going to be used to allow our users to be able to connect to our domain controller, and the network address translation is going to be used to map our private IP addresses and combine them into one public IP address. Finally, we are going to be using DHCP, which is Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, which is going to be used to assign a specific IP address or random IP address to each of our endpoint users. We could also configure it to reserve some IP addresses. For example, we are going to be reserving an IP address for our domain controller, which is going to be the gateway for our endpoint users. Now, those are the key features for the domain controller. After we set it up, we're going to be connecting our endpoint users to our domain controller. The three endpoint users that I'm going to set up and configure for the first chapter is going to be Windows 10, a Debian machine, and a Metasploitable vulnerable machine. And after setting up our endpoint users, connecting them to our domain controller, and doing some tests like vulnerability tests and map scans, etc., I'm going to be configuring and setting up Onion Security as a firewall, and setting up all the security and necessary configuration for it to protect our network. That's all for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.